He just died. No bright light, no tunnel, just darkness, then screaming, "Not yours." A newborn's. You're back. Again, same soul, different body, new name, new parents, new life. But the loop never ends. And now, the world knows the truth. Because scientists have uncovered something humanity was never meant to see: the soul pool. A finite reservoir of consciousness. You don't get to rest. You don't get to leave. You get recycled. Forever. And here's the most terrifying part. There are more babies than souls. So what happens when we run out? It started with a glitch. A newborn in Tokyo babbled words in fluent Russian before ever being taught. Another in Brazil described memories from a civil war in a country they'd never heard of. At first, these were just strange anomalies until patterns emerged. Neuroscientists found identical energy signatures between unrelated brains, soul imprints. They called them quantum resonance. Data backed it up. Geneticists were baffled, and then came the headline that broke the world. Human souls are finite, recycled, tracked. There was no afterlife, no spiritual reward, no heaven or hell. Only return, a cosmic recycling system. You die, and your soul instantly enters the next available human body. No delay, no memory, no choice. Human consciousness is just part of a closed system, a shared, finite resource, a soul pool. And now, every religion, every government, and every human on Earth is forced to reckon with a truth more disturbing than death itself. There are no new souls, only old ones, over and over again. But how did scientists discover something this hidden, this deep, this reality-shattering? Let's rewind to where it all began. The breakthrough came from a place no one expected, an international neurogenetics lab in Geneva, analyzing anomalies in infant cognition. Initially, their mission was simple: study early neural development, but something kept breaking their models. Newborns were showing bursts of synaptic activity that resembled the minds of adults, memories, language-like structures, and complex recognition patterns. But here's the kicker. They weren't random. These neural signatures matched the final EEG recordings of recently deceased individuals. Not similar, identical. At first, the researchers thought it was an error, maybe data corruption, or mislabeling, but it wasn't. They ran hundreds of tests, tracking neural signatures in dying patients and cross-referencing them with infants born within a 48-hour window. The match rate was disturbingly high, more than 60%. That's when the term soul signature was coined. But it wasn't just neurology. A group of quantum physicists independently discovered subtle quantum fluctuations in dying humans that collapsed and re-emerged elsewhere in a new consciousness. This phenomenon defied all laws of entropy. The energy didn't disappear. It transferred. Consciousness, they realized, was not a unique event. It was a loop. By the time independent labs on 3 continents replicated the findings, there was no more doubt. The World Science Authority released a historic statement. Consciousness is part of a finite, measurable system. Human souls are not infinite. They are recycled through instantaneous reincarnation. The soul pool is real. The world erupted. Some celebrated vindication. Others were horrified. Religion scrambled to reinterpret scripture. Atheists found themselves face to face with something spiritual they couldn't ignore. But everyone agreed on one thing. Everything had changed. Governments scrambled to adapt. A global task force was formed to track soul movements. Biometric and neurosignature scanning became mandatory at birth. Parents began receiving soul match reports suggesting who their newborns had been in past lives. Then came the birth of the Global Soul Registry, a massive ever-updating database tracking which souls were where and when. People obsessed over finding their past selves or loved ones reborn. Entire industries sprang up overnight. Soul genealogy, soul counseling, soul insurance. But the science revealed something even stranger. Some souls were recycled within seconds of death. Others, minutes. There was no waiting room, no purgatory. As soon as one died, the next available fetus was inhabited. A perfectly closed system, except it wasn't perfect. The birth rate was increasing, the death rate wasn't keeping up, and the soul pool wasn't expanding, which meant only one thing: a tipping point was coming, and fast. But before society could worry about shortages, it had to deal with a deeper crisis. What does grief even mean when your loved one isn't truly gone. At first, the knowledge that death wasn't permanent brought comfort. For a brief moment in history, funerals became celebrations. They're still out there, people said. They're not gone, just different. The world embraced a strange kind of hope, an after-death optimism that soothed the sting of loss. But that illusion didn't last, because the person you loved, they came back, just not as themselves. They might now be an infant on the other side of the planet, or a toddler in a completely different culture. They had your grandmother's soul, but not her memories, not her voice, not her laugh, just the same essence, untouchable, unreachable. And that's when humanity realized the dark irony. Reincarnation doesn't heal grief, it extends it. Grieving changed overnight. People began obsessively tracking newborns worldwide, hoping to find their reincarnated versions of their lost loved ones. This gave rise to an entire movement, soul tracing. Using neuropattern matching and emotional affinity scans, people would try to identify infants they believed carried the souls of their deceased family members. It started as a fringe phenomenon, then it went mainstream. Families filed legal claims over newborns they insisted were reincarnated relatives. Hospitals were overwhelmed with requests. Courts had no precedent. DNA didn't help. Birth records meant nothing. The soul's signature was the new identity. Imagine being a parent, holding your newborn child, only to be told, "That's my dead son. I know it. I can feel it." The legal system didn't know what to do. Some families won visitation rights. Others lost custody battles over children claimed by grieving strangers. It became a civil nightmare. And worse, some parents began imprinting their grief onto their babies, raising them as reincarnated versions of lost loved ones. Children were burdened with expectations, haunted by ghosts they never knew, and forced to play roles they never chose. This was the death of closure. You could no longer fully say goodbye. There was always the possibility that the soul you missed was still nearby, trapped inside another person, or starting a new life that had nothing to do with you. Religions fractured. Some banned soul tracing altogether. Others embraced it as spiritual reunion. Therapists coined a new diagnosis, post-reincarnation grief syndrome. Support groups boomed. And then came the real horror stories. Parents kidnapping children they believed were the souls of their murdered kids. Elderly women stalking toddlers in parks, convinced they were the reincarnation of their husbands. Obsession, delusion, despair. Grief didn't disappear, it mutated. Because in a world where death has no finality, mourning becomes a never-ending loop. And worse, it redefined how people saw every child. Was this baby truly new, or just someone old in disguise? And when the soul pool turned justice into a revolving door, the next moral crisis exploded. How do you punish someone if their next life might be innocent, or might already be here? When the world accepted that souls recycle instantly, the criminal justice system was the first institution to unravel. Because if a murderer dies, but their soul is reborn the next day in an innocent infant, what do you do with that child? The death penalty, once the harshest form of justice, became meaningless. Kill a killer, and their soul simply reappears elsewhere, untethered from their past. No punishment, no closure, just rebirth. Victims' families were enraged. Justice hasn't been served, they cried. He's still alive, just in a different skin. So governments scrambled to act, and in their panic, they created something even more terrifying. Soul sentencing. Using the Global Soul Registry, reincarnated individuals could now be tracked from life to life. If someone committed a heinous crime in one life, their soul was flagged for future surveillance. That meant babies were born with red tags on their consciousness. Before they could walk, they were labeled as dangerous. Before they could speak, they were already monitored. Before they could choose, the world had already chosen for them. Predictive profiling took over. Preschools refused flagged children. Insurance companies denied coverage. Employers ran soul background checks. Guilty until reborn innocent became the norm. But there was a deeper question no one could answer. Is a soul the same person across lives? If a baby has no memory, no knowledge, and no control over their previous actions, are they still morally responsible? Some said yes, a soul must carry its karmic weight. Others argued for soul amnesty, a global movement to reset all reincarnated souls at birth with legal innocence. But not everyone agreed. A new type of crime began to rise: soul vigilantism. Ordinary people, grieving or angry, began hunting down individuals whose souls had committed atrocities in past lives. "You killed my daughter in your last life," they'd scream, attacking children or teenagers who had no idea why they were being targeted. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred. Is it justice if you punish someone for something they don't remember? Is it justice if guilt is determined by your soul's history, not your actions? Courts collapsed under the pressure. Judges faced impossible decisions. Whole regions passed clean start laws, legally banning soul-based discrimination. Other regions doubled down, creating lifetime cumulative sentencing. You could be imprisoned or executed based on your entire reincarnation history. And then came the prison crisis. Souls who'd committed repeated crimes across multiple lives were no longer allowed to reincarnate freely. They were trapped, held in artificial stasis at the moment of death, prevented from re-entering the soul pool. Stored like data, a spiritual prison without walls, without time, without end. But with more souls removed from circulation, the pool began to shrink even faster. And that led to an even more chilling discovery. For every baby born, a soul had to be available. But what happens when births outnumber deaths? When there are more bodies than spirits? The soul pool was never designed for this many people. And when it started running dry, the world faced a new kind of apocalypse, consciousness without content. It started quietly. Hospitals in densely populated cities began noticing a strange anomaly. Some newborns wouldn't respond to light, sound, or touch. They had no reflexes, no cries. Their bodies functioned, but their minds didn't. Doctors called it blank infant syndrome, but they weren't sick. They weren't brain dead. They were something else entirely. They were born without souls. As the pattern expanded worldwide, chaos broke out. Scientists confirmed what had long been feared. The soul pool was not infinite. It had a limit, and humanity had passed it. For the first time in known history, there were more births than there were souls available for reincarnation. The implications were staggering. These blank infants, alive but empty, forced society to confront its deepest moral questions. Were they human? Should they be kept alive? Could they one day develop consciousness if a soul returned? No one had answers, only fear. Governments moved fast. Nations introduced reproductive licensing laws, only allowing new births when an available soul could be matched in advance. Entire populations were capped. Families were restricted to one child, sometimes one every 2 generations. Conception became a legal process, monitored, authorized, scheduled. You didn't get pregnant by accident anymore. You had to apply, wait, and hope a soul was available. The global birth rate plummeted. Some saw this as a tragedy. Others called it balance. But in the shadows, new black markets emerged. Illegal clinics began offering soul cloning, dangerous experimental tech that attempted to artificially replicate soul signatures for new births. But the results were unstable. Some cloned souls became erratic, violent, fragmented. They weren't complete souls, just echoes. Then came the rise of synthetic consciousness. Tech corporations claimed they could generate artificial minds to inhabit soulless infants. But ethical debates exploded. Were these creations real humans, or just code pretending to feel? A new term was coined: shell children, bodies inhabited by artificial minds, treated with suspicion, fear, and in some countries, outright banned. Religious leaders clashed. Some claimed the soul pool crisis was divine punishment for overpopulation. Others insisted that souls weren't lost, just trapped, in coma patients, in the dying, in failed transitions. They demanded mass euthanasia to free up souls. Entire nations faced existential crises. Desperate policies emerged. In some regions, the elderly were encouraged to consider voluntary soul release, euthanasia, in exchange for granting their soul to a newborn relative. In others, death was monetized. You could legally sell your soul slot, timing your death to coincide with a child's birth, often for a price. Human life became transactional. The rich scheduled deaths and births like boardroom mergers. The poor waited in limbo, hoping a stranger would die just in time. Soul scalping rings started tracking terminal patients and intercepting births. It was chaos. And yet, despite all the regulation, despite all the horror, some people still believed the crisis could be solved. New theories emerged. What if we could grow the soul pool, or access external consciousness, from other species, other dimensions, even synthetic intelligence. The race began. Labs around the world hunted for new sources of soul energy. Some turned to AI, others to quantum entanglement. Some looked to the animal kingdom, asking whether human souls could be born from evolved animal spirits, triggering yet another global debate about personhood. And while the world fought to solve the problem, a darker realization settled in. The soul pool had always been finite. We just didn't know, and now it was too late. But as the soul shortage deepened, humanity faced a deeper, more haunting question. If every soul is recycled, then where did the very first souls come from? The confirmation of a finite soul pool didn't just break science, it shattered belief. For centuries, religion had offered answers: heaven, hell, karma, divine judgment, spiritual ascension. Life was a journey, death was a transition. But now, it was just rotation. No ascension, no final destination. Just the loop: die, reborn, repeat. Theologians scrambled to reframe millennia of doctrine. Some claimed the soul pool was part of God's design, a sacred cycle of spiritual refinement. Others rejected the science altogether, branding it heresy, misinformation, or even demonic deception. But the data was public, the proof irrefutable. Churches emptied, new faiths rose. A new spiritual movement surged in popularity. The Soul Code, a belief system that viewed souls as fragments of a universal consciousness, each loop refining the core self through trial and error. Followers didn't pray for salvation, they prayed for release, an end to the cycle. Another group, the Continuumists, believed that the soul pool had been seeded by higher beings, external creators who initiated the cycle and abandoned it. To them, the real mission wasn't spiritual, it was technological. Escape the soul loop by uploading consciousness, creating a synthetic eternity. Meanwhile, the void seekers took a darker path. They claimed the cycle was a prison, a spiritual trap designed to keep humans docile, broken, forgetful. Their goal: disruption. Stop reincarnation at any cost, even if it meant collapsing the soul pool entirely. Governments began cracking down on fringe movements that promoted radical self-termination or the nullification of the soul. But the existential rot had already set in. For many, identity lost all meaning. If who you are today has nothing to do with who you were yesterday or who you'll be tomorrow, then what's the point? Your actions, your achievements, your relationships, everything is just a quick moment in a cycle of borrowed lives. The human experience itself began to feel staged. Philosophers struggled to answer: is morality still real if no soul is ever truly accountable? If every evil can be undone in another life, is anything ever final? And if your soul is not uniquely yours, but just a limited resource passed around like currency, are you still you? Even science offered no relief. Theories emerged that the soul pool was artificially constructed, a containment system built by forces long gone, with humanity stuck inside like goldfish in a glass bowl. Others posited that souls came from cosmic collisions, quantum accidents, or were byproducts of dark matter, a spiritual residue of the universe itself. But the most popular theory: there was never a first soul. The system had always existed. No beginning, no end, just the loop. And for a species obsessed with legacy, destiny, and finality, that truth hit harder than any prophecy ever could. Because if nothing ends, then maybe nothing matters. But in the midst of this collapse of meaning, another problem emerged. People began rejecting their current identities, haunted by fragments of who they used to be. The soul pool didn't just rewrite death, it erased the idea of personal identity as humanity knew it. Before the discovery, people believed in a stable self, a name, a story, a past. But after, that confidence fractured, because now, every time someone looked in the mirror, they wondered, who am I, really? A child, a teacher, a parent, or someone who once lived 1,000 lives before this one? The cultural obsession with identity shifted. Nationality, gender, religion. Suddenly these weren't seen as fixed or foundational, but arbitrary overlays on an ancient, endlessly recycled essence. You weren't just born into a family, you were inserted into a moment. And if identity could reset every lifetime, was it ever real to begin with? New forms of existential anxiety exploded. People began experiencing what became known as soul drift, a deep, internal unease, a phantom memory of lives they didn't consciously recall. Déjà vu became widespread. So did intrusive dreams, muscle memories, skills no one could explain. A teenage boy in Kenya instinctively played the cello despite never seeing one. A girl in rural Indonesia spoke fluent Icelandic in her sleep. A woman in Germany remembered being burned at the stake in the 1400s and described it with horrifying accuracy. People weren't just curious about their past lives, they were haunted by them. In response, tech companies began developing devices called soul echo amplifiers, machines that used neuroquantum scanning to detect fragments of prior life activity. For the first time, people could listen to whispers of who they used to be. This unleashed a new wave of identity obsession. People abandoned their birth names to take on recovered identities from past lives. A child who once lived as a World War II pilot, a CEO who now remembered being a 14th century monk. It didn't matter whether the echoes were accurate, only that they felt true. But this new fluidity came at a cost. Relationships fell apart. Parents no longer recognized their children as truly theirs. Spouses accused each other of soul infidelity. Secret connections to past life partners. Social stability eroded. People formed soul clans, groups of individuals who believed they shared intertwined reincarnation paths. Conflict surged as opposing clans claimed spiritual dominance over one another. Even employment was affected. Hiring managers began screening for past life compatibility. Artists insisted their talent came from prior genius. Athletes credited muscle memory from ancient warriors. Experience wasn't earned, it was inherited. A black market of forged soul records emerged, where people bought fake past life documents to enhance their status. Meanwhile, children born with blank souls, those with no detectable past lives, were treated as anomalies. In some cultures, as divine, in others, as defective. But the most tragic outcome was the erasure of the present self. People stopped living in the now. They became obsessed with what they used to be, or what they might become next. Life turned into a performance for some future incarnation's benefit. I want my next life to inherit something better, they said. Every action became an investment in the next loop. Some stopped taking risks altogether, terrified that mistakes would echo forward. Others lived recklessly, believing the consequences would be inherited by someone else, another version of them, in another time. Individuality was no longer sacred. It was just temporary. You weren't you. You were just now. But while humanity wrestled with the burden of recycled identity, a darker revelation shook the foundation of reincarnation itself. Souls weren't just being reused, they were breaking down. For decades after the discovery of the soul pool, humanity operated under one hopeful assumption, that while souls recycled endlessly, they remained whole. But that assumption was wrong. The first warning signs came from behavioral anomalies in children flagged, went through high-frequency reincarnation. Souls that had been tracked through multiple, closely spaced lifetimes. These individuals began showing signs of neurological instability. Not trauma, not disease, something else. Their personalities were fragmented, memories slipped in and out like broken glass in a kaleidoscope. They'd speak in unfamiliar languages, mid-sentence, display conflicting belief systems, experienced emotional triggers tied to lives they had no way of knowing. Doctors initially blamed psychological stress, but scans revealed a deeper problem: erratic soul resonance, the spiritual equivalent of corrupted data. Scientists realized what nobody wanted to believe: souls degrade. Every time a soul cycles without rest, without integration, without pause, it wears thin. Not physically, not emotionally, but metaphysically. Just like a photocopy of a photocopy, clarity fades. These degraded souls became known as fractured echoes, consciousnesses that could no longer fully stabilize inside a single identity. Some ended up institutionalized, diagnosed with dissociative or psychotic disorders. But the truth was more chilling. They weren't mentally ill. They were overused. A global soul decay registry was created. Terms like resonance fatigue and spiritual fragmentation syndrome entered the mainstream. Parents began to fear having children who'd inherited souls on the verge of collapse. And then came the horrifying truth. The vast majority of souls had already passed their healthy cycle limit. The soul pool wasn't just finite, it was dying. If left unaddressed, soul decay would reach a tipping point where human consciousness itself would cease to function reliably. People would be born without emotional coherence, without identity, without stability. A new wave of soul research emerged. Tech labs and spiritual collectives alike scrambled to find a solution. The leading theory: souls needed rest, not just between lives, but within the soul pool itself. And so, the race began to develop soul rest chambers, containment systems designed to simulate deep metaphysical stasis, allowing fractured souls to regenerate over time before being reborn. But access was limited, expensive, controversial. Only the wealthiest nations could afford soul recovery programs. The rest of the world continued the cycle, birthing children with increasingly unstable spirits. Some souls simply began to disappear, flickering out like a corrupted file that could no longer open. The spiritual community fractured even further. Some argued for a global pause on reproduction to let the soul pool heal. Others called for technological bypass, synthetic souls, consciousness emulators, AI-hosted identities, but nothing could replicate what a true soul was. Because even if humanity had mapped the system, even if they had tracked the movement of every soul in existence, there was still one thing no one could explain. Where did the soul's energy come from? And if it could die, could it also be born? Or had the system always been in decline? Humanity stood at the edge of a collapse, not of civilization, but of essence. A slow, quiet extinction, not of the body, but of the self. And as the soul pool faded, and the last true consciousnesses flickered in and out of borrowed lives, one final, chilling question remained. What if this isn't your first time watching this? You wake up, you live your life, you die, and then you wake up again. Different body, different name, same soul. You've laughed before, you've cried before, you've held hands with someone who once held you in another life, but you don't remember, not consciously. Still, you feel it sometimes, don't you? That strange familiarity, that uncanny sense of, I've been here before. The pull towards certain people, the fear of things you've never experienced, the dreams that feel like memories, the places that feel like home, without reason. That's your soul talking, whispering through the static. Because this isn't your first time through. And maybe it's not the first time you've heard these words. Maybe you've watched this video before. Not today, not even in this life. But once, a long time ago, when you had a different face, a different voice, a different version of this same eternal self. The loop doesn't stop. And now, humanity knows it. No heaven, no rest, just return. But what you do in this life still matters. Because your next self, they're going to inherit everything. Not your memories, but your consequences. If this reality shook something loose in your mind, or in your soul, there's a reason for that. If this made you question your own existence, don't let the message stop here. Hit like, so the algorithm reincarnates this video to someone else who needs it. Drop a comment with what you think you were in a past life, or what you fear you'll become next. And don't forget to subscribe for more disturbing, mind-bending realities that challenge everything you thought you knew. Because in this loop, the only way to stay awake is to keep watching.